When Cora Whitmore dragged the unconscious Duke of Aldridge out of the path of a shattered carriage wheel, she did not imagine that the greatest danger of the evening would begin only after his life had already been saved. The accident happened on the lower road outside Briarfen Assembly, just as twilight was giving way to the blue darkness of early spring. The horses had gone wild after a gunshot cracked somewhere beyond the hedgerow. Gentlemen shouted, ladies screamed and scattered silk over the roadside mud. The carriage lurched, one wheel striking a stone hard enough to splinter, and the vehicle canted violently toward the ditch. Before any of the finely dressed men nearest the scene had done more than curse the confusion, Cora was already moving. She had spent too much of her life rescuing what other people dropped: ledgers, children, sick hens, harvest accounts, her widowed mother's dignity, to stand still when metal and wood and flesh were all about to collapse together. She seized the Duke's arm as he tried to brace himself against the doorframe, felt the dangerous weight of him slipping, and threw both of them toward the wet grass just as the carriage slammed down where they had been. For one blurred moment, he lay half across her, breath driven out, rain in his dark hair, one gloved hand braced in the mud beside her shoulder. Then the noise of the crowd returned in a rush. "Your Grace!" someone shouted. Cora turned her face away before the attention could settle on her. Men of rank did not like being seen helpless, and women of no rank at all were rarely thanked for witnessing it. But the Duke of Aldridge opened his eyes, fixed them on her mud-spattered face, and said in a low voice that held more astonishment than embarrassment, "You pulled me clear." "I pulled whoever was in reach," Cora replied, trying to rise. His hand closed around her wrist, not roughly, but with the unthinking reflex of a man not yet steady. "Then I am fortunate I was nearest." It should have ended there. A short exchange, a curt nod, perhaps a purse discreetly pressed into her hand by a steward later. Cora would have preferred even less than that. She was the daughter of a provincial wool factor, tolerated in assembly rooms because her late father had once been useful to too many wealthy households to be ignored entirely. She had decent gloves, careful manners, and no illusion about the thinness of her social protection. Men looked through women like her until it became useful not to. But Briarfen did not survive on truth. It survived on spectacle. By the time the Duke was helped back inside the assembly hall and the broken carriage dragged from the road, the first version of the story had already escaped into candlelight. The Duke had clung to Miss Whitmore. Miss Whitmore had fallen into the Duke's arms. Miss Whitmore had been seen beneath him in the mud. Miss Whitmore had engineered the whole encounter. Society never moved faster than when it scented a woman's ruin disguised as entertainment. Cora knew exactly when the gossip crossed from dangerous to deadly. It was when Mrs. Valecourt, who had 3 daughters and the moral instincts of a knife, remarked within easy hearing of half the supper room, "One cannot blame an ambitious girl for taking hold of a duke where she finds him." The room rewarded the line with soft laughter. Cora stood beside the sideboard with a plate she could no longer taste and felt the old humiliation rise in her throat. That knowledge of being measured publicly by people who believed her feelings were too cheap to count. It did not matter that she had saved his life. It did not matter that every hand she had touched him with had been used to drag him out of danger rather than pull him closer. What mattered was that society had found a poorer woman near a powerful man and decided to turn the scene into appetite. Silence would have been safer. She knew that. Silence had protected women from worse things by letting the insult pass unchallenged and therefore unremembered. But Cora had spent too many years watching silence become the language other people used to assign her place. So when Mrs. Valecourt smiled and added, "Though perhaps Miss Whitmore mistakes rescue for invitation," Cora looked up and said clearly, "No, madam. I only mistook panic for breeding. The confusion has now been corrected." That should have ended the room's cruelty. Instead, it sharpened it. There was a stir of fans, a flash of offended delight, the small social shiver that comes when a woman without rank forgets to stay decorative while being insulted. Then the Duke of Aldridge, who had been speaking quietly with the magistrate near the hearth, crossed the room. He did not hurry. Men like him never needed to hurry to command attention. Tall, grave, broad-shouldered in dark evening clothes, still marked faintly at the cuff by roadside mud, he looked less like the polished center of a season than like something older and more dangerous that had been temporarily made to stand under chandeliers. He stopped beside Cora with a stillness that silenced the nearest whispers. "If Miss Whitmore had wished to make a spectacle of herself," he said, voice cool enough to cut glass, "she would hardly have chosen to do it by pulling a half-conscious man out of a collapsing carriage while the rest of you watched." Nobody answered. His gaze moved once across the company and landed finally on Mrs. Valecourt. "If there is any stain upon her reputation tonight, it belongs to those attempting to put it there." The shame in the room shifted direction so abruptly Cora almost felt dizzy. Not gone. Shame never vanished that easily, but redirected, which in public life was often the nearest thing to justice. Mrs. Valecourt laughed too brightly. "Your Grace, surely no harm was meant." "Then let us all be grateful the harm was made so visible before it could pretend to be innocence." He turned to Cora. For one suspended beat she expected courtesy, perhaps gratitude, perhaps some carefully distanced acknowledgement. Instead, he said, with measured clarity meant for every listening ear, "Miss Whitmore is under my protection. Anyone uncertain how to behave toward her may consult me before trying again." The room went silent in a new and far more dangerous way. Protection. A duke could say that and mean only temporary sponsorship, only public shielding, only an honorable correction to an ugly moment. But in a room already fevered with gossip, it could also mean attachment, preference, promise, private understanding. Cora felt 20 pairs of eyes turn into knives. Later, in the conservatory beyond the supper room, she rounded on him before he could speak. "Your Grace, what exactly have you done?" He stood among the damp citrus leaves and lantern shadows with one hand resting against the marble lip of a planter. Up close, he looked older than she had first thought. Perhaps 36, with deep-set dark eyes and the expression of a man who had learned restraint because the alternative had once cost him too much. "Stopped them," he said, "for one evening." "For longer if necessary." Cora stared. "You cannot mean that." "I mean," he said, "that by tomorrow, the room will have decided I intend to marry you, whether I encourage the notion or not. If I deny it, they will conclude I merely enjoyed your compromising position before discarding you to the consequences. If I remain silent, they will do the same thing more elegantly." She hated that he was right. "And if you affirm it?" He looked at her directly then. "Then they must treat you with the caution they would show a woman attached to me. It buys you room. It also solves a problem of my own." Cora folded her arms. "That sounds ominous." "It is practical." He told her then what society had not fully managed to bury. 2 years earlier, his mother and several political allies had begun pressing him toward an advantageous marriage with Lady Honoria Valecourt, eldest daughter of the very woman who had just mocked Cora publicly. The match would settle family expectations, estates, influence, and a tedious number of dinner conversations. Aldridge had refused repeatedly. Mrs. Valecourt, being a woman to whom refusal felt like a personal insult to be corrected by force of repetition, had turned persistence into siege. After tonight's scene, if rumor fastened itself to Cora, the same woman would use it either to destroy Cora outright or to corner the Duke into proving his detachment by humiliating her publicly. "So you propose what?" Cora asked. "That I become a shield you borrow?" His mouth changed slightly, not quite a smile. "Only if I may serve as one in return." The answer irritated her by being better than she wanted. He went on. "A formal understanding, not an engagement announced in church bands, but one acknowledged socially for the remainder of the season. We allow society to believe we are considering marriage seriously. Your reputation is protected. My mother's campaign for Lady Honoria is interrupted. Mrs. Valecourt loses the weapon she meant to make of you. At the end of the season, if we choose, we can say we discovered ourselves unsuited and part with dignity. If we choose, not if he chose, not if he dismissed her." The distinction hit her with unwelcome force. "It is an absurd arrangement," Cora said. "Yes, and dangerous. Very. And you speak of it as if it were a matter of grain tariffs." He lowered his gaze for the first time. "That is because if I allow myself to speak of it as anything else, I may begin to sound as though I am asking a woman I do not yet know to trust me with the wreckage of her name. I would prefer not to add sentiment to the pressure." There it was, the hidden grief beneath his discipline, visible only in fractures. Cora saw suddenly that this man's self-command was not arrogance, but containment. "What problem of your own does this truly solve?" she asked softly. He was silent long enough that she thought he would refuse. Then he said, "My younger brother married for love and died within a year of fever contracted while traveling to settle one of my estate disputes. Since then, every family attempt to arrange my life has sounded to me like a plan drafted over a grave. I have no intention of becoming a dutiful prize in someone else's campaign." The admission changed the air between them. Cora looked through the conservatory glass toward the assembly rooms where music had begun again, brittle and bright. She understood bargaining. She understood using the story society wanted as cover for the story one actually needed to survive. She also understood that if she returned to the supper room alone, the gossip would already be writing her future without her. "So," she said at last, "I am to become the woman you are nearly engaged to. If you agree. And if I refuse? I will still protect you as well as I can, though the protection will cost more and last less." He meant it. That, more than anything, decided her. "Then let us be nearly engaged," Cora said. "But if society is to believe it, Your Grace, you had better stop looking at me as if I am a treaty you plan to sign reluctantly." This time he did smile, briefly and with surprising warmth. "Then perhaps you had better teach me how to court convincingly." That was how the arrangement began. Within 3 days, invitations arrived at Whitmore Cottage that had been absent for years. Within 5, Cora was installed at Aldridge Hall under the nominal guardianship of the Dowager Duchess for the remainder of the spring season, because no one approved a scandal faster than society when it could be converted into acceptable romance. If Cora had expected gratitude from the household, she learned better immediately. The Dowager Duchess of Aldridge received her in the blue salon with the expression of a woman examining a letter she suspected had been sealed by the wrong hand. "So," the Dowager said, silver hair immaculate, spine unbent by either age or displeasure, "you are the young woman my grandson has chosen to drag through a battlefield he insists on calling a practical arrangement." Cora stood very straight. "Your Grace, that depends on whether the battlefield is yours, mine, or his." For the first time, something alert and almost approving entered the older woman's gaze. "Good," the Dowager murmured. "I had hoped he had not selected a decorative fool. Those are exhausting to defend." Life at Aldridge Hall became at once easier and more treacherous than Cora expected. Publicly, she and the Duke performed a careful version of courtship. He offered his arm at dinners. She rode with him in the East Park at hours chosen to be observed. He asked for her opinion on music before people inclined to repeat the detail elsewhere. She learned quickly that intimacy, when translated into aristocratic ritual, could be built out of small repetitions more potent than any declaration. In private, they negotiated terms as if drawing a treaty. He would never speak for her where she could speak for herself. She would never allow him to take the full weight of social injury intended for her if her own voice could redirect it. If either wished to end the arrangement, the other would accept it without argument, and whenever possible, truth would be preferred to performance between them, however false the courtship appeared outside the room. It should have kept them safe. Instead, it made them dangerous to each other. Aldridge was not a man built for flirtation, but he was built for attention of a more devastating kind. He remembered what tea she preferred after the second morning. He noticed when a maid had pinned her sleeve unevenly after a hurried change for dinner and distracted an entire conversation so she could repair it without humiliation. He listened, truly listened, when she spoke about wool prices, tenant accounts, or the absurdity of men who believed commerce became vulgar only once women understood it. Cora, for her part, proved to be the first person in years who spoke to him without either deference or strategy. She told him when he sounded overbearing. She laughed at his driest remarks instead of praising them as wisdom. She refused to let his title win arguments that his reasoning had lost. Within 2 weeks, the household had begun watching them with the cautious fascination reserved for fires that no longer looked accidental. Not everyone watched kindly. Lady Honoria Valecourt arrived at Aldridge Hall for the dowager's musical evening dressed in pearl silk and offended entitlement. Beautiful, accomplished, and carrying her mother's talent for social vivisection beneath a gentler voice, she greeted Cora as if acknowledging the existence of an unexpected stain. "My dear Miss Whitmore," Honoria said, "how astonishingly swiftly fortune can change when a carriage overturns in the correct direction." Cora smiled. "Yes, though I imagine true talent lies in managing disappointment when it does not." The nearby gentleman pretended sudden fascination with the mantel clock. Honoria's expression chilled, but the real attack came later. A packet of anonymous notes began circulating among the guest rooms. Suggestions that Cora had trapped the Duke by vulgar theatrics, that her late father's accounts were less respectable than remembered, that women risen too quickly inevitably brought some hidden stain with them. Cora found one note left beside her teacup in the morning room. Instead of hiding it, she carried it straight to the dowager. "Do you wish me to leave?" she asked. The older woman read the note, folded it once, and dropped it into the fire. "No. I wish to know which coward in my house mistook anonymous malice for breeding." She lifted her chin. "If you leave because they hiss, Miss Whitmore, they will think the sound has authority. Stay, and make them discover otherwise." It was not tenderness. It was better. It was alliance in a form the dowager could respect. The deeper threat, however, came from outside the house. Cora began to notice irregularities in Aldridge estate correspondence, letters requesting delayed payments from tenant women, several parcels transferred under suspicious pressure, a pair of guardianship petitions involving girls not yet 17. At first, she assumed these were merely the ordinary injustices of a system built to favor men who owned more paper than conscience. But as she sorted figures for the estate steward one rainy afternoon, she saw the same intermediary name repeated across unrelated accounts. Silas Marr, a solicitor in Briarfen, known for managing discreet arrangements too ugly for daylight. "Why is Marr handling petitions tied to the Vale courts?" she asked. Aldridge looked up sharply. "Because my mother occasionally employs him for settlements. Why?" Cora spread the documents across the library table. Because these are not ordinary settlements. Look here. Widow Pike loses her lease after refusing to move into a cousin's household. Miss Davenant's dowry is transferred into trust on grounds of instability just before an engagement advantageous to Mrs. Valecourt's allies. A schoolmaster's daughter disappears from one parish list and reappears in domestic service on a Valecourt property. It is the same pattern repeated with different names. He came around to stand beside her. "Control through respectability," he said after a moment. "Through fear of what happens to a woman once she no longer appears reputable." Their eyes met. Something fierce and wordless passed between them. Recognition, anger, the sudden understanding that the gossip surrounding Cora had not been idle cruelty alone, but part of a more practiced machinery. Aldridge's face hardened into the stillness she had begun to associate with genuine rage. "My brother's widow was pressured by Mrs. Valecourt after his death," he said quietly. "Not directly. Through advice. Through suggestions about which friendships were suitable and which visitors should not be received. When she resisted, invitations stopped. Then credit. Then help. I thought it was mere spite." "No," Cora said, "it is policy." From that night, the false engagement became a private investigation. They traced petitions, land transfers, loans, and household appointments through half the county. Cora did what no one else had thought to do. She followed women's names instead of men's transactions. Servants dismissed after witnessing too much. Daughters relocated after inconvenient courtships. Widows made socially untouchable before being pressured into dependency. Where Aldridge saw estates and influence, Cora saw human cost. Where she saw patterns, he knew how to force doors open once the pattern could be named. The work made them intimate in ways their staged courtship had not. Candlelight over ledgers. Long arguments in the library that turned unexpectedly into laughter. Walks through the orchard where strategy slid into confession. He told her about the brother whose death had hollowed out his family and made duty taste like ash. She told him what it meant to grow up clever enough to help keep a household solvent and still be treated as ornamental the moment gentlemen entered the room. He listened as if every word mattered. That, more than his title or protection, unsettled her. So did the moments when he forgot not to reveal feeling. The way his hand hovered at the small of her back when descending crowded stairs. The pause before he released her fingers after lifting her into a carriage. The quiet relief in his face whenever she entered a room after being absent too long. By midsummer, the entire county believed the wedding inevitable. That was precisely when the arrangement began to fail. Not publicly. Publicly, it had never worked better. But inside it, truth was pressing against the walls. Cora no longer knew whether his tenderness belonged to performance or preference. Aldridge no longer knew whether her loyalty was born of necessity, gratitude, or something he scarcely allowed himself to name. They continued as before, because either changing or speaking would have felt more dangerous than silence. Then Cora's mother vanished. Mrs. Whitmore had gone that morning to visit a former shopkeeper's wife in the lower lane and never arrived. Her basket was later found in the road near the marsh crossing, overturned beside wheel tracks too fresh for comfort. Cora did not scream when the news reached Aldridge Hall. She only went cold all through, as if every nerve had turned to winter wire. "She was taken to force me out," Cora said at once. Aldridge was already summoning riders. "Or to force me into terms." "No," Cora shook her head. "This is a woman's punishment. It is meant to tell me what happens when I keep refusing the story they wrote for me." The county searched through dusk and into the night. Honoria claimed distress too polished to trust. Mrs. Valecourt withdrew to her room with a headache so timely it might have been planned. And as the hours passed, Cora forced herself to think instead of collapse. "What did your mother say?" Aldridge asked her in the library near midnight. "About the old Valecourt dower house at Fenmere." Cora looked up. "Only that no one uses it now because the East Foundation is unsound." She went still. Unsound houses are excellent for hiding respectable crimes. He did not waste breath praising her deduction. Within minutes, they were on horseback with 4 trusted men and a groom carrying lanterns wrapped in dark cloth. Fenmere Dower House crouched above the reeds like a place embarrassed to remain standing. One shutter banged in the wind. The back kitchen door had been forced recently and then pulled carefully shut again. Inside, the rooms smelled of damp linen, extinguished fires, and fear. They found Mrs. Whitmore locked in an upstairs chamber, shaken but alive, attended by a terrified maid too young to understand the scale of what she had been ordered to do. The girl broke almost at once, confessing that she had been hired through Silas Marr and told only that an elderly woman must be kept quietly until Miss Whitmore agreed to leave Aldridge Hall and deny any engagement. Honoria, Cora thought first. But the truth proved uglier. In the writing desk downstairs, behind a false panel warped by damp, Cora discovered a bundle of correspondence tied in green ribbon. Some letters were from Silas Marr, some from Mrs. Valecourt, and 3, written in Honoria's elegant hand, discussed in chillingly practical language how a woman's reputation could be leveraged to secure compliance where affection failed. One line was underlined twice. "If the mother is removed from view, the daughter will remember how narrow her world truly is." Aldridge read the letters and went very still. "Is this enough?" Cora asked, voice flatter than she recognized. "It is enough to break them," he said. "What if your family wishes silence?" He lifted his head. "Then my family will discover that I no longer do." The reckoning that followed did not resemble the neat, moral endings people later preferred to tell. There were magistrates to persuade, allies to corner, witnesses to protect, servants terrified of losing places if they spoke, and a dozen gentlemen suddenly eager to claim they had always distrusted the Valecourts, once evidence made distrust fashionable. The Dowager Duchess proved, to Cora's growing admiration, entirely merciless where polished cruelty was concerned. She wielded her social authority like artillery. Within a week, the county had turned. Mrs. Valecourt's salons emptied. Honoria's admirers developed urgent business elsewhere. Silas Marr attempted to flee with papers and was intercepted at the river crossing with enough incriminating documents to poison half the county against him. Guardianship schemes, coerced settlements, blackmail notes, private debts traded for women's obedience. The whole architecture of respectable predation began to show. Cora gave her statement herself. She named the jokes made at Briarfen Assembly, the letters, the pressure, the assumption that a woman of lesser station could be made useful by being publicly dirtied first. She spoke not like a victim begging to be believed, but like an accountant finally balancing a set of books everyone else had pretended not to read. People listened differently when shame arrived, carrying ledgers. When it was over, Aldridge found her on the west terrace at dusk, the same hour in which he had first stood above her in roadside mud, with rain in his hair and surprise in his eyes. "You may leave me now with perfect honor," he said. Cora turned. "Is that what you want?" He looked at her as if truth were a country he had delayed entering too long. "No, but I have no right to ask you to remain because a false engagement became useful to me in ways I did not expect." The wind moved the yew branches below them. Somewhere inside the house, a door closed softly. Cora crossed the terrace until only a breath separated them. "Then I will be plain," she said. "I agreed to your arrangement because it was sensible. I stayed because it became necessary. But I return to you now for no reason that can be entered into any ledger. I love you, Aldridge. Not because you protected me in public, though you did, because afterward you kept returning my own judgment to me as if it were the most natural thing in the world. His face changed with an emotion so unguarded it almost hurt to see. Cora, he said, and her name in his mouth sounded like both apology and home. I have loved you since the week you informed my grandmother that battlefields belong equally to the women forced onto them. She laughed then, sudden and shaking from relief. That was an appalling courtship confession. It was the truest one available. When he kissed her, it was with the grave care of a man who understood exactly what it meant to be given something freely after both of them had spent months pretending choice could be staged without cost. Their wedding took place in the Aldridge chapel before autumn turned fully cold. The Dowager Duchess cried once and denied it. Mrs. Whitmore wore lavender and looked as if astonishment had finally yielded to pride. Half the county attended in order to witness romance. The better half stayed to witness correction. Cora walked toward the altar not as the girl whispered over in muddy roadside scandal, but as the woman who had followed the tracks beneath that scandal back to the system that made it profitable. Later, people would tell the story badly. They would say a working girl saved a duke and won a coronet. They would say a false engagement became true because proximity is romantic and titles are persuasive. They would say love bridged a difference in class, as if class had been the only enemy in the room. They were wrong, or at best incomplete. The truer story was this. A woman pulled a man from a wreck, and together they learned how many lives respectable society had been willing to wreck more quietly for years. A duke offered protection, but the woman he protected turned out to be the one who could name the machinery of harm more clearly than anyone at his table. Their arrangement became love, not because she was lifted into his world, but because he made room for her mind, her anger, her judgment, and her courage to stand there fully beside him. In the years that followed, Aldridge Hall changed. Not perfectly. No old house surrendered its habits in a season, but widows found leases renewed instead of revised into dependence. Young women discovered that recommendations could be issued without barter hidden behind them. Solicitors learned that the Duchess of Aldridge read correspondence with a predator's attention where injustice was concerned. And when society tried, now and then, to tell Cora that she had been fortunate to be chosen, she would smile in that calm way that unsettled foolish people and think of roadside mud, broken wheels, and the first moment shame realized it had finally been interrupted.